But maybe the sheep didn't actually wander off, but rather was left behind. Maybe it was too young or too old to keep up with the rest of the flock. The most frequent questions that I am asked by people who are seeking a church home is, first, what kind of clothes do people wear? And second, do you have any programs for children? Parents are looking for a church that has a place for their children. Young people are looking for a church that values them and addresses their needs. The elderly are looking for a church that will not tuck them away in a corner, expecting them to remain quiet and unobtrusive. Yes, we are a small church. And yes, we have limited resources, both in funds for age-specific curricula and in volunteers to serve as leadership. But we need to think seriously and creatively about how to make sure that the sheep are not being left behind because they don't fit within the right age bracket. We members of the flock need to recognize the value of youth, and experience and wisdom of age are important assets that must not be left to wander away. And we need to be proactive in making sure all ages have access to our church. No sheep left behind. Or here's a thought about why the sheep may have been shunned by the others. Maybe it had to do with its horns, or lack thereof. We generally think of male sheep or rams as having horns, and the female sheep or ewes as not having horns. But in fact, that's not always the case. In some sheep breeds, both sexes are horned. In some breeds, only the rams have horns. Sometimes neither sex is horned, and they are said to be polled or naturally hornless. And believe it or not, there is a breed of sheep called the Jacob sheep, which has 4 horns on its head. The point I'm trying to make is you can't always assume a sheep is male or female simply because it has a horn or not. And what if this particular wandering sheep was shunned because it was assumed to be male when in fact it was female? One of the largest schismatic debates within today's church has to do with sexual identity and sexual orientation. Churches continue to wrangle over transgender issues and same-sex relationships, all the while losing one sheep after another simply because they are more concerned with whether or not the sheep have horns or not. And the question MCC churches the world over are asking is, who cares? Who cares whether they look like a traditional male or traditional female? Who cares if they look like a mixture? Who cares if they're same sex, opposite sex, multi-sex, or no sex at all? Who cares? The psalmist proudly proclaims, I praise you, O God, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made, and wonderful are your works. God's world is not a humdrum, boring, old binary world. It is multifaceted, it's diverse, and it is good. Or maybe, just maybe, the sheep thought it would be better off without the flock because of an infection it carried. Maybe the flock had become so carried away with its own prejudice and ignorance, so afraid of contracting a disease that couldn't be contracted through casual contact, that the sheep was shunned and pushed aside. Maybe the sheep with the infection finally had enough and said, "I'm out of here." It breaks my heart to know there are people who are living with HIV and are afraid of letting members of their own congregation know about it. They are afraid, A, because of the hostile reception that they might receive, or B, because that the information will be passed along in the form of gossip to no telling who. And what's more, their fears are justifiable. The Christian church is still not ready to embrace the HIV population. It's still in denial, pretending that there is no problem when in fact there is. If it were really and truly open to the HIV population, then there would be other churches that would be begging to partner with this one in its HIV ministry. But they aren't. We need to continue to make our church a safe place for all people, for people of all colors and economic statuses, for people of all ages, for people of all sexual orientations and identities, and for people regardless of their HIV status. Our gospel reading opened with an explanation for the two parables. It said that the tax collectors and people who were labeled as sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees grumbled among themselves, saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." If we are anything at all, we must be a church that welcomes people who have been set apart, people who have been standing on the outside looking in for too long. We must be a church that welcomes them and eats with them, and we must make sure that no one, but no one, wanders from the flock because of a sense of lack of welcome. Amen.